Hamas pulled off a fairly sophisticated attack. I mean, they came by like land, sea, and air. They took out the Israeli surveillance, which is supposed to be the big, the greatest surveillance system in the world. And they pulled this off. Does anyone think that they didn't expect an Israeli response from this? It's like, no, of course they knew exactly what Israel would do. And this is what they were trying to provoke them to do. Because Hamas doesn't care about innocent Palestinians dying. But what they wanted was to turn, the world against Israel, and particularly turn the Muslim world. I mean, not that it takes much to turn them against it, but to really put pressure on some of these other governments who had, signed on to the Abraham Accords, which basically was using U.S. tax dollars to buy off these other Arab countries to sell out the Palestinians. So basically for years, these other Arab countries wouldn't recognize Israel, wouldn't normalize relations with Israel, because they were sitting there saying like, hey, this is totally unfair. Like you kicked all of these people out, and you don't really have a right to this land, and they need to be treated with whatever, given independence or something like that. And so we won't normalize relations with you. And then basically Trump's plan and Israel's plan was like, well, how about we just bribe you to normalize relations with Israel, even though we're not giving the Palestinians their freedom. And he got a bunch of them to sign on to it. And so for the Palestinians, this was like, I mean, you could almost imagine the hopelessness, because now this was kind of your only hope, that someone else was going to catch your back. And now everybody's basically agreed, like, yeah, look, you're never getting your state, you're never getting your independence, we're never going back to 67 borders, this is life forever. And like
an open air prison.
Yeah. I mean, people get upset about that characterization, and it's not perfect.
It's not perfect, but it's
close.
It's containment.
Yeah.
It's some kind of containment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it's imagine, if all you got to do with all of these things. This is why I would like Ron Paul is the greatest American hero in my opinion, because like this was his whole central point on foreign policy, was always like, you just have to try a little bit to put yourself in their shoes. And how would you feel if you were like occupied by a foreign government, which essentially isn't really a foreign government. It's really your government, because they're the ones who really run the place. And how would you feel about that? In the West Bank, where they're still under military occupation, these guys, the IDF run in and scream curfew. And you got to run inside your house when they do that. Just like that, even just that level of like being controlled by a group of people who are not your people,
Isn't the most crazy thing that human beings still behave in these patterns where we have groups of people that don't know at all, that have no personal interaction whatsoever with other groups of people, and they're willing to murder them?
Yeah.
Like it's sort of like a default mechanism of the default part of the human system. Human beings, when they have control of massive amounts of property and resources, they default into that mode. And that's just what's really insane about all this, is that I would have thought by now we'd have figured that out and moved past some of the most ridiculous ideas, but we haven't. It's still battles over religion, battles over territory. Like, holy shit, it could be the end of us over the dumbest battles.
And it seems like you would think that just with what we have, like the level of civilization that we have, the level of technology and medical innovation, like all these things, that you'd be like, you would almost think if you didn't already know what the truth was, you'd be like, well, war, we don't do war anymore. That's what, big mass murder campaigns with giant machines of death? We don't do that. That's like a thing we did 3,000 years ago. We've moved past that. We have other ways of like resolving these disputes. But
they still do it.
But we still do it.
Do you think that Israel believes they can dismantle Hamas and install a government that they can reasonably discuss things with? But even if there was a reasonable discussion, like, what would that entail?
Well, okay, but this is what I'll say, right? I think that totally could happen. I mean, it's tricky, but the history of it this will kind of blow your mind. And by the way, this is going to sound like a a conspiracy theory if you haven't heard this before, but this is totally 100% true, and it's been run in the day after, on October 8th. There was a big piece in the Times of Israel about this. There was a front page of Haaretz. These are big newspapers in Israel, and if you want to, you can go to antiwar.com. My boy Scott Horton and Connor Friedman just wrote this great piece about this, and they've got all the quotes in it, so you can just go read it for yourself. And this is in their own words that this is admitted that it was Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy for years to prop up Hamas, specifically because then there would be no negotiating a state for the Palestinians. Because no one in the international community is going to look at Hamas, this terrorist organization, and say, yeah, we recognize them. So the plan was to undermine the more secular Palestinian Authority types so that they wouldn't be in control, Hamas would be in control, and then no one would ever negotiate their state. So just to be clear here, this is, and by the way, I mean, you can find direct quotes from Benjamin Netanyahu saying this in his own words, saying that you must support Hamas, we must continue funding and supporting Hamas so that they can never get a state, specifically for that intended reason. So basically what Benjamin Netanyahu did was for years prop up this terrorist organization and then fail to defend his people from them on October 7th. And it's just, again, it's mind-boggling to me that this element gets left out of the conversation in America. But by the way, it's not left out of the conversation in Israel. Like, their newspapers are all talking about this, how this plan blew up in his face. But it's really, this is what happened here. It's not that there's this desire at the highest level of the Israeli government, because this is what they always say: we have no partner for peace. We have no one who's willing to negotiate with us. But it's just not true. Every time they have had somebody who steps up, and look, just to be clear here, when I was talking about 1947, 1948, how Israel, like the state of Israel was created, then in 1967, when they took control of everything, what everybody always says, I shouldn't say what everybody always says. There's people who say crazy stuff. But what Arafat said once he rejected terrorism, even what Hamas said when they first, gained some power in Gaza, was 67 borders. They want to go back to the 67 borders. So they're not saying we want 100% of this back, at least at those points in time. They were just saying, give us our 22% back. You know what I mean? And let us be an autonomous, independent nation.
So what would have to happen for that? First of all, that seems like there's no way Israel's going to accept something like that.